Hello, and welcome to another episode of Herstories. I am so proud and honored to have a good, close one of my marketing genius that I can truly say, Sherean. Welcome so much to Herstories.
Thank you, Elaine.
And I'm going to embarrass you. I'm going to tell everyone a story about. So, I met you. We used to live in the same neighborhood.
hmm
And I remember seeing a neighborhood email that went around, and I heard your kind of commentary and your kind of intelligent response. And I remember thinking at that moment, I wanted to be friends with you. I found you had such a great voice, such a great passion. And then I found out we have so many things in common. You are a marketing genius. You've got the background with, communications. And what this conversation really leads into is your experience with political campaigns, which I'm completely learning more from you and something that's such a passion to my heart. And I can't wait for people to get to know you. So thank you so much for giving me your time to be on Herstories today.
It's a thrill and a pleasure. Are you sure that email was thoughtful and not like a clap back that I sent?
I think I would have been so much worse. I think you handled it, beautifully. But I got to dig it up because I can assure you it's in my email. So we're going to start off with who you are. So I'd love everyone to give you a background. This is one of many conversations you're going to hear Sherean. She has an interesting background and childhood. So I'd like that to be another conversation. But I'd love you to tell everyone who you are.
Okay, well, I'm Sherean Malekzadeh. That name is Persian. I'm Persian on my dad's side. That certainly has informed a lot of who I am and how I experience the world. I am American on my mom's side. I always joke now that I guess only Trump can decide which I really am since he gets
Yeah,
to
you're one or
decide.
the other, right? How are you?
Well, I mean, I didn't change and become Persian overnight like apparently Vice President Harris became black overnight. So I'm just waiting for him to tell me who I really am. But for now, I identify as both. I started out my career as a copywriter in ad agencies, and then I worked for television stations. And I did that for a good decade or so. It eventually brought me to Atlanta. And then I got into dot coms in the 90s, back in the wild, wild web, as we called it. And in 2001, I started my own agency called New Thought Marketing, which is actually a reference to my Persian history. There was a town that my great, great, great grandfather used to take the family to called Nofarest. And my dad describes it as having the most beautiful, succulent fruit just that you could pick off the trees and that the water was clear and cool. And Nofarest loosely translates to New Thought. So that's actually how I named my
I
agency.
did not
Uh,
know that. I don't know how I
yeah.
didn't. That is absolutely incredible. And I will have to jump back and say, when I heard that Trump said, oh, she became black, I
Yes.
grew up, I'm half German, half American. So I'm the same as you. I don't look different. That's my only attribute is, hey, you
Right.
can't look at me and go, oh, she's an American. It's like, no, actually, I identify as half German. I've always, my
Right.
sister feel that way. So yes, I didn't become German. I was born two different sides. But so I'd love to get into, you have a background in supporting local candidates and helping them with
hmm
their campaigns. I'd love you to
hmm
talk about that and how you really got involved because you have this great agency and I'll post it on my resource page. Definitely check out this agency because I said to you before, it's really a digital marketing agency. You do everything, but I think so many agents say they're marketing but don't have that digital component. So when you go to the website, you're going to understand what I'm talking about and I'll make sure there's a reference to it. But how did you get into the political kind of arena? What brought you into that?
Well, when Michelle Nunn ran for U.S. Senate in Georgia, I went and volunteered for the campaign and was brought into sort of a small group initially. And I helped set up some social media. And that kind of is where I started. Then the city that you and I live in, Brookhaven, was not a city. It became a city. And so we had all these people running for office. And so I volunteered to help. I always say, you can donate time, treasure, or talent. And I had like Liam Neeson, I have a unique skill set. And at the time, 12 years ago, I was getting asked to speak a lot on social media to a lot of different organizations. And so I said, listen, I can help you with that. I can do your logos. I can, because I'm marketing agency. So that's really how I got started. And then a couple years later, campaigns started hiring me to do that. So it was not just me volunteering, but I was actually getting paid to do not well. It pays poorly. And then fast forward a few cycles, and then I was asked to do some training at a group called Emerge, which helps train women candidates, and Georgia Windless, which also helps train women candidates. So I got to know some even more candidates, like Lucy McBath was in one of my trainings.
And tell
And then
this is a global podcast, and I have friends and community. Tell everyone who Lucy McBath is, because I'm like such a fangirl of her, but I'd love just give a little bit of who she is, because this campaign, when you say her name and the fact that you were part of this, to me is just, and knowing her. So I'd love you to mention who she is.
She's amazing. So Lucy McBath is one of the women they call the mothers of the movement, the gun sense movement. Her son, Jordan Davis, was violently, viciously murdered. He was the teenager in Florida who was in the back of his car listening to music, and this guy got out of his car and shot at them and killed Jordan. He did get convicted, unlike a lot of these people.
Yeah, very rarely convicted, unfortunately, in these situations.
Yeah, it was Lucy's only child, and she will tell you that she did not stop being a mother to Jordan the day that he was murdered. And so she kind of mothers us all. There's this ability that Lucy has that is phenomenal. Lucy then became an advocate. She became one of the spokespeople for Moms Demand, which is a national organization that advocates for gun sensibility regulations. And she spoke at the Democratic National Convention, all of these things. So she decided she was going to run for a state seat here in Georgia. And that's when I met her. And then the District 6 U.S. House seat became open, and she pivoted and switched and ran for that. She had a lot of third-party money from Moms Demand, which helped her. She already had name recognition. And then she became our House representative, and she's done an amazing job.
And she's very good. We're going to get into like different candidates and whatnot and talk through it. But she really does give back to the community. She's here. She's accessible. She goes to local events. You see her. I've seen her in the community. And that's what, in the end, you want a politician that has your best interests at heart, that goes to DC, which is what we grew up with is, they're helping represent us, not
right.
the other things. They're there to be there. And I feel like Lucy's a great representation. I'd love to talk about, so you and I were talking, and, I've been in comms, many years, and as what I found phenomenal, and we'll talk about this at this point of time, President Joe Biden decided to support and pull out of the next election, putting Kamala Harris, the vice president, into the nomination for Democratic president. And Kamala just announced, Vice President just announced that Tim Walz will be the running mate as a VP. So that's where we are currently in the time. It's the beginning of August.
Yes.
So what you and I talked about is we found this, and I've been in comms and work with, top leaders on a casting communication plan, rolling this out. I'd love us to get into, there's so much that no one understands behind this. From a marketing aspect, understand, this is an incredible feat, what they've done to pull it off prior to the DNC event. But I'd love to get some of your thoughts about branding and marketing and the different speeches. There's so much to unfold because it's, people talk about the political piece, but to me, the marketing and comms, all I do is think about how they roll this out and how one person supported, and then the endorsements just kept rolling. And that is a strategic plan. No one was talking over each other. They really had it nailed down. For once, the Democrats are not great at this. So I'd love to, sorry.
Yeah, I think there's so much to discuss. So just starting with the decision and the announcement itself. It's my understanding that she did not know it was coming on that Sunday. Her husband, Doug, was actually out in California having lunch with some friends, and he had left his phone in the car. And so when the president announced that he was going to not run, there was an hour between that and when he said he was going to endorse Kamala Harris. And she was trying to get a hold of Doug. And eventually when she got in the car when he got in the car and saw the messages, he called her and she was like, "Where the fuck have you been?" She's like, "I need you." So I don't think this was like discussed with her ahead of time necessarily. I think it was.
I do think Biden, though, in my opinion, and I want to get your opinion, he really listens to his advisors, the community, Obama, Clinton. He has a great source of advice, like people that really respect him and are in his inner circle. I think Joe Biden was listening to what was happening. And I think he, in my opinion, will go down in history, no matter what your political views. He sacrificed power and being a president for another 4 years, knowing there's a chance he could lose. And this is what's right for democracy. And that
He absolutely put the country first.
he was not, I don't think it was done for someone who served so long. But I do think he knew, and I think he just was like, here's what's going to happen. And
Yes,
picking Kamala as the vice president years ago was foreshadowing of knowing this really could happen, and she's the best person.
yeah, I think a lot of us who were concerned that if he stepped down, there would be this open primary convention floor fight. We were really worried about what we call the bro oligarchy, right? The bros trying to anoint some random white candidate. And that was really our fear. And you could see Black women online and Black women in organizing spaces saying, if you pass over Kamala Harris, there will be hell to pay. And
it wouldn't have been the right thing. And what you and I talked about before, and know that we talk very often, and we also went to lunch to have we had a whole conversation about it.
So exciting.
Didn't know that if Biden ended up pulling out, if the political campaign funds would only go to Kamala, they don't go to anywhere else. It doesn't go to any, and I didn't actually know that at the time. I was like, that's really interesting.
It is, because she was on the name and so one of the first things that the Harris campaign had to do was claim the money, right? So they had to change the name of the fund, and they did that the first day, I believe. So they went right into action. And then, you saw this palpable shift because you started seeing all these funny memes and all of these videos, and all of this was sort of organically happening. But the online team, the social media team for the Biden-Harris campaign, they were able to switch quickly and start pivoting to a different kind of more bold, I guess, aggressive voice and it's not that they weren't doing that for Biden. They had dark Brandon memes and things, but they had the candidate that they had. She's a different candidate. And so I think people think that she stood up a whole new team in a day, and she did not. I want to be clear. It was the same team. They just pivoted to a different candidate. I don't think that they had a chance to sit down and figure out messaging that quickly. I think some of that organically happened. She was already out on the campaign trail speaking, so she already kind of had a stump speech that they probably just, edited it a bit.
But I do think they also, the social media team to me is incredible. They're marketing the social media. They're also embracing who Kamala is.
Yes.
Right? The Republicans are trying to go, oh, she laughs and she's got this. What I find absolutely incredible, they're embracing it. Yes, she does laugh a lot. She shows joy. She shows emotion. She is, and if you haven't heard the coconut meme, I mean, It is everywhere. Where they've said, you know what, this is who our candidate is, and they're going to embrace it. Not that they didn't with Joe Biden. It's a totally different. She's young. She's 59. She's dynamic, super intelligent. And I'm not discrediting Joe Biden at all. Different world, different. They're able to play.
I think there's two things there, though, Elaine, that I want to not exactly push back on, but maybe just bring a slightly different perspective. One is that a lot of that was actually happening organically online from Gen Z. They are the ones who saw that the Republicans were trying to make something of her coconut. And for those of you who don't know, she was at a speech a couple years ago, and she talked about a phrase her mother used to say, which was, "What, did you just fall out of a coconut tree, like you dum-dum?" And when she said it, she laughed. And years ago, they took that clip to make something of her having some sort of deranged laugh, hysterical, like, women, how we are, we're hysterical. But it was like Gen Z collectively on TikTok said, not on my watch. And they basically took that and they started mixing it with popular songs, the laugh and the meme, the whole thing. And they just started making it hilarious. And it was one after another on my TikTok feed. So then the Harris campaign saw that, and then they started reposting some of that. So I'm not sure that it came from the campaign so much as it bubbled up.
I think you're right. They embraced what the Gen Zers were doing, and they took the lead from them, because there's no way you can plant it just naturally culminated with the songs, and then Beyonce,
right,
who gave her the rights to the song Freedom.
Right. So immediately they reached out and asked Beyonce if they could use the rights to her song Freedom. And then you'll see in her speeches, she's basically reclaiming the word freedom. from the way the Republicans have used it, which is freedom from government interference. Well, she's saying, yeah, freedom from government interference in our bodies, freedom in our healthcare to make the choices with, so she's reclaiming the word freedom and punctuating it with that great song from Beyonce's Lemonade album, which was years ago. So I do want to say that a lot of these younger things, it's very exciting for those of us who spend a lot of time online. We're extremely online. We see that. But the people who vote like it's their job are over 50. And they may or may not have heard of the coconut meme. They may or may not have heard of the laughter thing. They may or may not care about any of that. So,
and the term brat. I know that
yes,
the news reporters like, what does a brat mean?
What is brat? And so I do think that while it's exciting for a lot of us and it's exciting for young people, and it is giving Democrats this sort of fresh drink of cold water, it's not necessarily reaching the folks who are the ones who really do vote. And I heard from somebody who was at the Harris rally in Georgia last week, and he said, Megan Thee Stallion was performing, and he said there were all these older people in the audience who were like, who is she? And older Black people too, wasn't? And he said they were all puzzled. So I do think that we have to be realistic that that's fun and it's exciting. And to the extent that it is exciting people to donate and to volunteer and it's changing the narrative in the press, I love all of that. But I want to be clear, we still have to do our job of knocking on doors and getting mailers out to the folks who are not extremely online, because they are extreme voters and we need to make sure that they are motivated.
I'd love to get into that and then talk about the VP pick, but talking about, let's continue on. What you and I both know, and anyone who knows me, I'm a huge political podcast. Pod Saves America, Saves the World, can't stop listening to them. But one of the things I didn't realize is we talk about branding. Branding in political arena is absolutely critical. Yeah. And the campaign has to come out with the logo, as you mentioned, but then they have to come out with, they come out the logo, but then there's a few weeks gap of who your vice president is, but they're starting to brand planes and content, and everything has to look the same and have the same feel. So I'd love you to get into that, because that I think phenomenal. And anyone that's seeing this visually, and I know I'll show some pictures if you're listening to it on a podcast. Sherean has some examples, but I'd love you to hold up for anyone.
Yes, I knew you were going to ask me this. So for the first week, when it was just Harris, right, they quickly adopted a font that was similar to the font that was in the current Biden-Harris logo. And they quickly adopted that into some signage for the rallies that she was. And by the way, what a head spinning couple weeks for her. And then they started vetting vice presidential candidates pretty quickly as they narrowed it down to 3 or 4.
So let's back up one thing. What's the normal process? Because I heard it's months normally to vet.
Yes.
In the past. And this had to be done in 2 to 3 weeks, correct?
I think it was 2 weeks, really. Yeah. And so you started seeing a lot of surrogates pop up on TV, right? A lot. You saw Governor Walz a lot. You saw Governor Shapiro a lot. You saw Senator Mark Kelly, Pete Buttigieg, Secretary Buttigieg. And those were all kind of mini auditions. And I imagine a lot of that was actually coordinated with the campaign, because they also wanted to see how people did online. That's more your comms realm than mine, but that's...
Yeah, and the messaging was spot on. And they became a little more aggressive to the talking points with freedom and everything else. They hit it, they nailed it. Every single one of the surrogates was great. Really. And
so I think one of the things that happened out of that was Governor Walz is the one who came up with the framing that the Republicans are just weird. And then the Harris campaign started to run with that. And they did not give him that language. He had that language, right? And then everybody just really embraced it.
Anyone who hears him when he first said it, it was such a natural comment that just amplified what the reality of how we view a lot of the Republicans is. They'll call us other names, but it's yeah, they are weird. That's not it is. And then it's you show why we think they're weird. And it just was a natural, he said it so on the cuff, and it was so perfect.
Exactly. And I think it gave us permission to tap into the joy of her campaign. So right before, it was this Trump is all doom and gloom. We're going to have a Great Depression if Harris is elected.
cities. It's
Yes.
apocalypse. Yeah.
And then the Democrats, we were countering with, we're going to lose democracy if Trump is elected. So I've heard Governor Walz say it's not that democracy isn't on the ballot. It absolutely is. But this is just such a heavy load to carry. And it's so much easier for us to just say, you know what, these guys are weird. It's weird that they want to ban books. It's weird that they want to, all of that. So I think that framing is good. It gave us permission to exhale, really, truly. And
Believe that, knowing that we have two incredible candidates that we will only be so lucky to have them represent our country. Truly,
sure.
like good humans. I did a TikTok the other day, which I'm sure you saw, just kindness. We're getting back to kindness, decency, character, the things that's the way political climates used to be. And that's why I keep telling my kids, I'm like, this is not the way it was when I was growing up. It wasn't. And now the last few years has been just, we're mean. And I feel like hearing Kamala and Tim, they're just nice, good people. You can't, no one's
As was Biden. Biden is such a nice person. Yeah.
Such a nice person. But I feel that I want to make one more comment about it is, when you start digging in and they're trying to find skeletons, there's not really many skeletons. And yes, Tim ended up saying, he had a DUI. His wife said, in 95, shape up. He did change his life. And that was his one thing that was a big moment in his life. But there's no one coming out saying he's an asshole. No one's coming out saying he's fraudulent. No one's coming to have a decent guy that we're calling him the dad of America, the grandpa of America. That's amazing to have, which
100
that you want to hug him. Everyone wants to, people that never heard of him want to hug him. Yeah. Like I didn't know of him 2 weeks ago,
Elaine, this is more your expertise than mine, but I fully expect they will come out with some things about him not being a nice guy. They're going to hit him at his strength. Same thing with Kamala Harris. She's joyful. So I suspect they will come out and talk about how she's shrill, how she's a tough boss, how she's a horrible person. So I fully expect those attacks to come. Is that also your
100%
expectation?
That is and people try to spin, right now, you've probably heard, which is making my head explode, is they're calling him Tampon Tim.
Yeah.
Has said in his state that, there's tampons free for any child that needs it, both in the boys' bathroom and girls' bathroom. And they're saying, oh, well, he loves the trans world and and you know what? From someone who in 8th grade had an accident in her class and friends helped her, you should shut the fuck up, because that makes sense. Look, if they would have had that in my school, I wouldn't have had a problem at the age of 12 and 13. And I know many girls that have had that problem. It's none of your business. And until you bleed in front of a classroom and your pants are showing, you should shut the fuck up. Like, you can call him Tampon Tim. It's like, oh my God, I wish I had Tampon Tim when I was at that age.
Right? And in an election year where Roe is on the ballot, to bring up something that relates to women's health care is so fucking stupid. Pardon my French.
Anyway,
so fucking stupid.
So I'll get off my tangent because I'm like, that shows how much I love him more. I'm like obsessed with him. That's decency. That's being decent to someone that doesn't know their body and learning and whatever. But so we'll go off. So
okay, back to the logos. So you wanted me to talk about the logos. All right. So what I imagine happened, and I've seen a little reporting on this, but this is just also my thinking, is the graphic design team probably had a remit or maybe a creative brief a few days before the announcement was made, that these were kind of the finalist candidates. And maybe it was the top 4 that we'd heard about. And they were busy designing logos for all of them. At the same time, her speech writing team would have been writing, and I did read reporting on this, speeches for all 4 of those candidates. And so they would have been ready with all of that. They would have had the logos designed. They would have had merch designs. They would not have had anything at the printer yet, but they would have had all of those things designed so that when the announcement was made.
Yeah. And what you said is, my understanding is whatever the cutoff, it's like 4 days before you have 4, however, but the last 48 hours, you're down to 2. They have it all written that you can interchange. There's only a small group of people who know what that printing is going out to be. It is a closed group, and they keep it much to their vest to let it happen, is my understanding. That's political parties.
So something that people maybe don't know about the Democrats is we always use union print shops. We don't go necessarily for the lowest print bid. It's always a union shop. So I imagine there was some union shop in Delaware or Pennsylvania, probably Pennsylvania, since they had the first rally there, that worked overnight or worked all day. They didn't have to print up too many signs for that first rally. And all the merch is it's in the shop, but it's not shipping till September 1st. So they just really needed the visuals.
Yeah, they need the visuals. It was, and because Philly from Wilmington's only 45 minutes, half an hour, that's where this Kamala took over Biden's headquarters of course, which is in Wilmington, and they've chose, I think they're, and you and I talked about before, and I do want to, can you show the sign, and then I have another, I wanted to.
So I wanted to talk just for a second about the logo design, because there's so much that goes into it, and that they did this so quickly is really a remarkable testimony to her team, or the team that she inherited. Now, I do know she's making some changes at the top level, but I feel like a lot of the kind of day-to-day folks were probably still kept on. Amount of thinking that goes into logo design. In my agency, we do a ton of logos. So you have a type only treatment, or you have a treatment that has like an icon built in. Like the Biden-Harris campaign had this little flag kind of built into the E. You'll also see there's a lot of spacing. We call that kerning. There's a lot of spacing between the letters. They made the Biden name and the Harris name the same width, not the same height, but the same width, which they were able to do because there's only one letter difference, 5 versus 6. But they have this icon that they're able to use, right? It's very warm and friendly and approachable. I mean, it feels like Grandpa Joe, right? You kind of get that sense. Harris Wall's logo is quite a bit different. These, I would call the font a more assertive font. Interesting. It doesn't necessarily have the joy that you would think. Like if I were really critiquing it, it doesn't have the joy that is so prevalent in her campaign, but it definitely has a bold kind of, it's making a statement. It's very simple, but these are aggressive letters. They're kerned a little closer together. They did not try to spread walls out, which it wouldn't, I don't think it would have worked with this heavy of a font. But what most people don't know, Shirley Chisholm was the first Black person to run for president. I want you to look, if you can see, the font that she used for Chisholm.
I saw it. And
then tell me that isn't, tell me they did not do that intentionally. I'm pretty sure they did.
No, I 100%. And my stepdaughter, who went to Parsons, had a whole semester in font. She's a graphic designer, and so she'd always be like, "That's the font," and that was because now I have an eye for it, because I've learned from her. My first impression was that sign, because when she was announced, I thought of that 1972, the year I was born. So it is pretty, they don't do anything. My whole thing is with a campaign, most people are really, this whole branding and the signage, they're very deliberate. There's a correlation between that, very deliberate.
Yes. So I think that it's fascinating to me how they came up with that. Obviously, they would have presented several different logo designs to her senior team, who would have made the final decision. She may or may not have been involved in that final decision. Who knows? She was pretty busy. To be honest, she may have seen it on a phone for 5 seconds.
That's something we talked about before is, because she thankfully inherited Biden's infrastructure. It wasn't all new where you're like, oh my God, what do I do? She really did. He turned over the team from the minute it became incorporated that she was going, or however, once she announced, she had her team. But what you and I talked about was she has the infrastructure in place. They were opening, and I'd love you to get into that, because that's something that people forget. Right now, I'm hearing Trump, you probably heard this week in Valdosta, Georgia, they tried to open a Trump office and it ended up in a brawl. And it was just this whole, they don't have the infrastructure in some of these rural areas, but now, well, and that's where Biden and Harris really, she was able to jump on to what he was doing.
So Trump has 2 campaign managers, co-campaign managers, and they're not inept, but they definitely have to deal with the client that they have. And one of the things that good, strong campaign teams do is they concentrate heavily on a get out the vote effort. And that is what we call direct voter contact. That could be door knocks, it could be phone calls, it could be text messages, lit drop, where, you drop mailers on people's doorsteps, or like walk cards or rack cards. And the Trump campaign wanted to budget for that. And Trump said, no, I will get out the vote. So what Trump is relying on is earned media, which is free press. And he's used to getting a ton of it because he'll just say some shit and he gets coverage. It's killing him that all of the coverage right now, all the spotlight is on the Harris campaign. And again, that was not really intentional. It just sort of happened that way. But You
Yeah.
had a week where Harris was all the talk because it just happened. Then you
Yeah.
had a week where who's her VP going to be? Now you've got a week where we know who the VP is. And then next week, starting on the 19th, I believe, we start the Democratic convention. So we have this month of press, and everywhere she's going, she's attracting these huge, enthusiastic crowds. So it's driving him nuts because his entire get out the vote strategy is relying on earned media. I can tell you, if I had a candidate who was doing that, I would not want to work for them. I would go, that's insane. You don't do that. And so the Harris campaign had already been opening campaign offices all over the state of Georgia and all of the other states that they thought were must win or flippable, potentially flippable states. So I know we had an office that was supposed to open in Forsyth County. And for your listeners who don't know about Forsyth County is a traditionally ruby red area of the Atlanta north suburbs, like
Isn't,
about an hour north.
I hate to say her name, Marjorie Taylor Greene's, isn't she in that county, or is she in another county? She might be in another county.
I think she's in a different county.
Yeah, it's like that kind of northern Georgia, right? I think so.
Well, it was actually known as a sundown town, which a sundown town is, the towns that Black people traditionally would not visit after dark. And the area around Forsyth was famous for some really bad incidences of sundown town. So it's not an area that I would have necessarily thought was on their map, but they're trying to flip the whole state. And I do happen to know the Forsyth Democrats group up there, and they're very active and enthusiastic. So they were about to open that office, and then Trump got shot. And so they decided they were going to not open that office that weekend. Instead, they ended up opening after Kamala Harris was the nominee. And they had 400 people show up for this opening in Forsyth County, which is unbelievable. Like, if you told me they had 50, I would have thought that was amazing. And Governor Andy Beshear came down and helped open that office. So this is what they're doing. They were using surrogates all over in these swing states to open these offices, and they're getting all these people. They signed up in the first week. I think it was over 180,000 volunteers. Check my math on that. But volunteers are signing up at all of these offices. They're all getting trained. It's phenomenal.
It is.
Yes.
Just to see even the level of donations. I hate, I grew up, we talked about it earlier, the German elections, most countries do you 4 weeks.
Yes.
We spend on elections, what we could do with that money makes my head explode.
Yeah, you need $1 billion to run for president.
$1 billion. And the fact that she was, July was $316 million she raised. Mm-hmm. And Trump was, touting the 137 million. And it's like, those are astronomical, but and I wanted to talk about, we talked about that, different media in different demographics. You recently had someone ask you the question about why are we doing ads, and what if, ads are tailored for different markets. So I'd love you to get into that as you being an expert in that.
So somebody said, what do they need all the money for? And they're already tired of seeing the ads here in Georgia. So they need the money for a couple of things. Those offices have to have staff. And then canvassers, which are the people who knock on doors and talk about the candidate, make sure you're going to vote. They are volunteers, but they're also paid. We hire paid canvassers for campaigns. They are working to coordinate campaigns with local candidates too. So if you're in a swing state and you are running for House or even a state race, they will coordinate with you where they'll drop your literature as well. So there's a lot of help to down-ballot races that are given from these national campaigns. So they need the money for that. They need the money for television, which is hella expensive. They need the money for digital, social media marketing. You have to create videos now. You can't just do pictures. That's more expensive. They have to have, video and photographers following her around. Her comms team is managing all these surrogates on all of these different platforms. Each state that is a swing state has a that is paid. 20, 30 people could be for different roles. And some of it is like outreach to African Americans or outreach to old people who like to play bocce or like very specific interest groups. So that's where the money goes. As it relates to television, my friend asked.
Sorry, the one thing I wanted to mention also, I didn't know that they rent planes. So she might have a different situation because she does have Air Force Two, but most candidates have to. Trump obviously has his own plane and whatnot, but that is, you forget that they need to get to all these locations. That's right. She's doing 7 cities in 7 days, so they need the plane and the infrastructure
and the buses and all of that. And you got to hire the people. And again, we always hire union when we can. So we're paying people fairly. And I will tell you, even if you're hired on a presidential campaign, the amount of money they pay on those campaigns for the staff is good money. It's not terrible. And it has good benefits. And they really do walk the walk, which I love to see. So television.
Yeah,
television ads are super expensive. There's a law that says that broadcast television has to provide what's called the lowest rate for political candidates. So in the year leading up to a political campaign, they don't want to give anybody a really good deal on any TV ads because then they have to match that rate for any political. So they don't. So they kind of keep the rates at a higher level. So when political comes in, they're paying at a higher rate, essentially, even though it's the lowest guaranteed rate. Already paying more money. And then they're wanting to advertise on programming like news and sports, which has what we consider higher engagement. People are more engaged in the sporting event. So the rate is higher on those programs as well. A lot of money. So my friend was like, why are they spending so much money on TV? And I said, well, because people who are over 50 watch a lot of news and sports, and they aren't terminally online like the rest of us. So I have had campaigns that wanted to put more money in digital, and I have said to them, no, you can actually afford cable. Go ahead and let's buy an MSNBC and even some Fox on cable, because you don't need to reach the young people any more than you're already.
And if you're in the state that considers, as you mentioned, could be flippable, just brace yourself. You've got how many more months, what is it, 85 days or whatever left.
Yes.
You're going to see these ads like
every break.
Every break, everything. So I don't want to, I know I can, as we joke, I can talk to you forever, but I really want then some, talk about, I get asked all the time, how do I get involved? How can I do these, things? And
I'm so glad they're asking.
I told you since I last talked to you, it was like 10 people were like, so what are you thinking of doing? And people have a misconception about certain ways you can get involved. And I love your 3 things so I'd love you to go through that. And then how do people get involved? Of time, what is it?
Talent.
Time,
talent, and treasure. I always tell my son this, like when you're young, you might have more time to dedicate to an organization where you can volunteer your time. When you get older and you have children, you might not have very much time, but you maybe have some money and you can donate that. And then if you have a special talent, and it's something that they need, then you can offer those skills. Like, database management and things like that are often needed in local campaigns.
So
your time.
So if people want to get active, because I think people are like, how do I begin? And you did mention something that I want to highlight is, I contribute to the bigger campaign. I also contribute to local. I do the grassroots. Know that when you want to go to any of your political affiliations, they do have grassroots. The bigger campaigns, sometimes the money does not trickle down. So just be like, if you want to contribute to the local campaigns, know that more might be the grassroots. And
so it's so funny. I actually looked up before this call. There are roughly 10 U.S. Senate races that are critical for us to win. And there are 4 that are toss-ups that we really absolutely have to win. And those are Michigan, Montana, Nevada, and Ohio with Sherrod Brown. Nevada is Rosen, Tester in Montana, and I forget who is in Michigan. But those are considered toss-up races. And if we believe that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going to be elected, they need a Democratic House and Senate in order to codify Roe versus Wade, for example. So if I had extra money right now, I would be looking at those campaigns to see how well funded they are. I would also volunteer. You don't have to live in those states to volunteer. You can phone bank and do postcards and other things. And then in terms of the House, there are 10 races that are toss-ups that we have to win. At 9 of them, Biden won by only like roughly 51%. So now I think she's probably going to overperform, but who knows, right? So these are things you can Google, like literally Google what are considered the most flippable races. The margins in the House and Senate are so narrow that we really have to invest our time in there. In Georgia, none of the races are considered flippable. I spoke with somebody yesterday about that in anticipation of this call. That said, they still would appreciate your time, talent, and treasure. They always will. And it's a good idea to get in the habit of being involved. Well, so if you've got extra money and you've maxed out to the Harris campaign, you might want to look at some of those other races and see where they need help.
And there's organizations I mentioned earlier. Pod Saves America has a campaign. you can donate to them and they will take the money you give to fight the campaigns that are flippable. So if you
Yes.
are confused, no, there's great organizations that are safe. They take their money, they use it really well to help with those others. So for me, obviously with Georgia, but I also donate to them to go, hey, if you need help in Michigan, I give my $20 to Michigan. And it doesn't,
Hmm.
don't feel, I know that everyone talks about, the big donors, but, Kamala's campaign came out with most people never contributed before and they contributed less than $100. So no, even if you give $20, sometimes when Kamala announced, I give $10, $20. That to me wanted my, just a little. And I feel that way, hey, if I spend $100 and give a bunch of these campaigns $10, $10
Yeah,
is $10 that they need.
for
So
sure. And so beyond the donation of your treasure or money, the time one is really important. And most people I know are already signed up in Georgia for shifts to do some of what I'm about to tell you, which is canvassing or phone banking or text banking. So canvassing always sounds like this scary thing, like you're going to go knock on doors and get yelled at. And that's not how it works at all. So the Democratic Party, I imagine Republicans do as well, but they have a database and they have field people who are in charge of what they call cutting turf. That's the language they use. So they literally will be like, okay, we're going to send you out to these homes in this neighborhood. They're very specific homes that in their database they know are Democrats. And they are coded as like very likely to vote or mostly likely. And you'll know, and they'll train you on which kind of person. So mostly what happens is you're knocking on people's doors who are like, oh my God, I'm so excited about Harris Wallet. And they want to talk about it. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get a commitment from them to vote. You're trying to get a commitment from them to vote early. Because if you vote early, your name comes out of that list and then the campaign can move on and eventually get down to the very unlikely to vote, but still Democrats. And I've phone banked that list before and that list is wild.
and I
So,
want to reiterate that. So every one of us, every day, I get 15 texts. I'm a true blue. There's no question who I'm voting for.
huh,
However, as Sherean just said, if you want to get off that list where people stop texting you, vote as soon as you can. Get your vote to count, and
yeah.
then help the others that need to vote. But just know if it bugs you, you can do something about it to be the quickest to be off the
Well,
list.
you'll also be taken off the mailer list, all of it. So it does start to reduce the aggravation factor. I use Google text messaging and it filters all those, so I don't get a bunch of them. So I that's a little tip for those of you at home.
Yeah.
So the canvassing is actually fun. You can do canvassing with friends. You can canvass with your kids if you've got teenagers, or even young kids can do it. It's fun.
That's one of the questions I got this week was how
So
do you
you go to so just Google Democratic Party offices near me or Harris campaign office near me. And each county, generally speaking, will have one unless you're in super rural counties. You may have to go over a county and then you call them or you drop in. They're staffed all the time and you ask how you can help. And they may need help filing in the office. Who knows? I know when John Ossoff was running, we used to organize snacks for the volunteers and the staffers. So each of us would like take a day and we would drop off like Costco snacks or a homemade casserole. So there's all kinds of things that you can do, but they train you. That's the other thing I want to make sure people understand. Like, you don't go knocking on doors. You have a little app on your phone, tells you where you're going. You have a script and you're trained on all that beforehand. And everyone I know who has done it, who's overcome their shyness, if you will, has loved it. It's a really great way to meet people who are like-minded. It's a great way to make friends as an adult, which is something that is so hard to do.
and you mentioned, I want everyone to get that point. It is not cold door to door. It's not the way, to me, when I grew up, I remember doing that with my father and we, talk about different local candidates and whatnot. It's different. It is super tailored, as you said. No, and a lot of these, what I learned, and I knew people that did this during one of the elections, I think for Biden, that some people don't know they're not registered anymore. Some states
Yeah.
have changed their laws, or they moved and they didn't know. And so I saw, I knew friends that were like, oh, they didn't know they want to vote, but they didn't know they couldn't. And if you
Yeah,
have,
that's a big one.
I wanted to also bring up if you have an older family member, make sure that they have a ride to the polls. You and I have talked about this before. Taking someone that can't vote or, has a hard time getting or has a job. And that is another way that you can really volunteer, that just offer a ride to someone in local. I know my mom's, we've mentioned this before, her previous retirement community, like the bus wasn't working. So like I took people to the polls. Like that's,
Right.
took some of her friends, to go with us. And that's super important, that
I
piece
know
too.
people who literally print out little cards that have the voting dates, early voting starts, absentee starts, and have like a QR code that takes you to the Secretary of State's voter page. They do this on their own and they just hand them out to cashiers and wherever they go. Like there's lots of ways you can kind of organically get involved in your own network for sure. But I just want to make sure you know, and if you go to those local campaign offices or you go on mobilized, .us and you look for the Harris campaign stuff, you'll find a ton of events listed in your area. And those events might be postcard parties, or it might be phone banking, or it might be a training to do some of that stuff. And you sign up for those things. And then much like you're talking about checking with your elderly friends and neighbors, also your teenagers, make sure they understand. So you have teenagers, right? When they have friends over, because I know they're social and they do, ask them when they're at college if they have a plan to vote. Are they going to be home for fall break? Is there early voting available for them during fall break? What's their plan to vote? And they're not going to know, so you can show them how to do it.
And I've been telling a lot of my friends that I know, I have a lot of friends that kids are going to college. I'm like, hey, do you get your absentee ballot? That was an issue you and I've talked about before. My stepdaughter and all of her friends in New York didn't get the Georgia ballots.
I remember.
They never showed up. And if we would have known that that was going to be an issue, we couldn't even get it to FedEx it in time to make it. And that's horrible.
I remember. That was horrible.
So now I'm like proactive to any of my friends. I'm like, make sure you go ahead, get those absentee ballots, have your child, and just, you're going to have to FedEx for whatever this, you want to make sure their vote counts. Because the younger generation is really, I have 2 kids that are able to vote in this election, and they couldn't be more excited to have their voice heard. Because I told my youngest son said, does every voice really matter? And I said, absolutely, it matters. Especially when you get down to some of these elections that are so close in numbers, every voice matters.
Georgia went for Trump by 11,000 votes. That's a couple of voters in each precinct. Like it's nothing. It's really very close.
So you and I can talk forever. I think this was hopefully very, informational for people. We're happy to do another. There's so many other topics about politics. You and I can talk forever. Marketing, so many other. So when people listen, feel free to send me a message. You can go on Herstories and get, if there's other things you want us to talk about as we get closer to the election, I definitely would like to talk about it. And I don't want to forget. So what is your thought about having the vice president pick with Tim Walz? What's your impression?
I didn't think she had a bad choice. There were pros and maybe one little slight con for each of them. Nothing really major. I think his energy matches her energy. He's beloved. He's the dad that we all want to have. If Joe Biden was the grandpa we wanted, Tim Walz is the dad we want, and
the best comment is, I'm sure you heard, he's literally 6 months younger than Kamala. And he made the comment, he's like, everyone's asking him at the age. And he said, if you monitor school lunches for 20 years, you'd look like this. And it's like, and Brad Pitt's like 100 days older than him. And it's like, wow, like school really did age me being in education, which I would probably agree. I'm excited to see what they do. I think that I feel like I did with Obama. I was active with that campaign. I was active with Hillary. Like obviously you can tell my leaning politically affiliation, but I feel we have good people. We talked about before, decent humans. And I think these are great tips. Get involved, do Google searches. You have any questions? We're happy to answer it.
Yeah, and I have people reach out to me all the time wanting to know how to get involved, and I quickly Google what's in their neighborhood and their area. So I'm happy to do that for folks. And to your point about the different elections, I do want to say that Obama represented hope, right? He's the hope and change candidate. And Biden, we've often referred to him as heal. He was the healing candidate. He needed to heal the nation. And what I've seen is that this campaign with Harris and Walz is rise. Like now we're going to rise up, and we're reclaiming our voice on issues. We're not shying away from the attacks. Gen Z's got our back big time. And I think it is. I think it kind of went hope, heal, and now it's time to rise.
I love it and totally agree. So one last question. I'm about to ask you. So for the closing question, I kind of say these 2 words because I do feel they overlap. And what empowers you, and then also what inspires you?
So, I told you I started my career as a writer. So, of course, what inspires us is something we can wax poetic about for days. It's usually a deadline, is what inspires me. Shit, I better get that done. But on a larger, kind of more human level, I am blessed with a lot of Black women friends, and I have had them for decades. And in general, Black women are such an inspiration to me. I think everything feel like I've struggled with in life, they've struggled twice as much. And yet they are, as a community, able to express joy and optimism, and not foolish optimism. Like they know the work, they understand the hurdles, but they have fun, and they manage to embrace each other and create space for us. So really, Black women. And then I told you this earlier, Gen Z has me super inspired right now. They are not just the memes and their shit posting, so the whole thing with the couch fucking meme, I don't know if people know this, but it was just some stoned Gen Z kid who was like, JD Vance, said he liked to fuck a couch. It's on page 191 of his book. And everybody believed it at first. And it was totally not true. He just made it up. But it's hilarious to me that some rando like that could derail. He was ripe for derailing, but still, it's hysterical. So Gen Z.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. And the best with that one is JD Vance thought he created a TikTok. He wanted an account. So so he was like, oh, look at all the engagement. The entire engagement is Gen Zers talking about the couches.
Oh, that's hysterical.
There's not a love seat. And it's like,
I didn't see that.
No, not all good press, not all good re-engagement is a good thing for you. But that, to me, I know people say, hey, we grew up in a generation, you and I will have this conversation again. We both work the 70, 80 hours a week. We worked so hard, and we live to work versus my stepdaughter says we work to live, like difference.
Right. Yeah, that's a Gen Z thing, and I love it.
I love it, but people always say they're lazy. And in this scenario, to me, I feel that they're not. Like in so many, I don't feel that, but I do feel that they have a voice and they're willing to show it. Do not discredit them. They're going to be the ones going out to get the vote. I do agree with you. I feel that we haven't helped support the Black community as much. I feel like I'm in a back seat. I'm here to help you get, the candidate that's for all of us. But I do feel that, you said that beautifully. And I think both those, and everyone deserves to have this, equality and a voice we're here to help each other. So,
so those two groups really inspire me.
I love it. And thank you. I hope this was informational for everyone. We have a lot more that we can share with you. Sherean, it is always an absolute pleasure. It's the highlight of my day. And
so much fun.
Can't wait to do this again. And I will be putting her website on the resource page on Herstory.
Thank you.
Questions you have for us and any other topics you'd like us to talk about. I think branding and logos is so fascinating. So I feel like I could have you on like a regular series with just you. Thank you everyone for listening to Herstories, and we will
Thank you, Elaine.
soon. Thank you again. Have a great day, everyone. We'll talk soon.